It violated the charts before it violated their patience. Imperial deep-range sensors flagged the contact at 0.18 light seconds beyond the outer marker, moving on a vector that cut across established jump corridors without deceleration. No transponder. No recognizable drive wake. The object's speed estimate recalculated 3 times in 6 seconds, each revision higher than the last, until the system annotated the value with a warning glyph reserved for faulty data. The duty analyst cleared the alert and re-ran the scan manually. The numbers persisted, the command chamber filled with restrained amusement. Unknown vessels appeared with ritual regularity at the Empire's borders. Pilgrims, smugglers, lost. Machines clinging to obsolete physics. This one was simply early, its hull profile resolved as a blunt silhouette, asymmetrical, layered, devoid of the luminous structures that marked modern construction. Armor seams were visible to the naked eye. External mass registered at 11.6 million tons, give or take sensor error. A relic, an admiral said, and the word propagated through the chamber like a shared joke. Classification routines failed cleanly. No known manufacturer, no historical match. Drive emissions did not align with energy field propulsion, slipstream modulation, or any sanctioned hybrid. A junior officer suggested an experimental courier platform. Another suggested a derelict pushed by stellar winds. Both were dismissed when the object crossed another distance marker without slowing, covering 90,000 kilometers in under 2 seconds. Too fast. The Stinger appeared unbidden on an auxiliary display, as analysts flagged the approach speed at 4 times the Empire's maximum doctrinal intercept for unshielded mass. The Admiralty waved it away. Faulty telemetry was common at range. Physics did not bend for unidentified debris. They opened passive channels and found nothing. No emissions, no heat bloom beyond what a mechanical reactor might produce. The object did not maneuver to avoid the growing sensor net. It did not respond to hails broadcast in 6 languages and 3 compliance codes. It simply held vector, closing from 1.2 million kilometers to 900,000 km with indifferent consistency. Mockery sharpened into irritation. The Empire tolerated mystery only when it could be catalogued. Orders went out to tighten the perimeter and bring forward picket cruisers, not as a threat but as instruction. The object's projected mass and velocity were logged, its kinetic energy calculated and dismissed as irrelevant in the face of layered energy shields that had never failed. A weapons officer noted quietly that the vessel's acceleration curve was wrong. It was not spiking or coasting. It was smooth, continuous, as if the object had decided on a speed long ago and saw no reason to change it. The comment was acknowledged and ignored. At 600,000 kilometers, the object's outline sharpened, enough to reveal weapon apertures along a central spine. Primitive ports open to vacuum, unprotected by energy lattices. Laughter returned thinner now. Projectile weapons implied supply limitations, reload cycles, attrition. They implied a species that had not learned the efficiencies of modern war. Processable. TE. Classification stamped itself across the tactical display. The object was relabeled accordingly, its trajectory boxed in red, its fate reduced to timelines and percentages. Compliance protocols queued automatically. A demonstration volley was scheduled for when the range closed to 18,000 kilometers. Energy output capped to avoid unnecessary destruction. The unknown vessel crossed another marker without deviation. Imperial. Commanders leaned back in their seats, secure in the certainty that whatever this was, it would end the same way everything else did. Explained, corrected, and erased. No one ordered evasive maneuvers. No one considered retreat. The Empire did not fear anomalies. It corrected them. Behind the jokes and the data overlays, the object continued its approach, silent, fast, and utterly uninterested in being understood. They spoke as if obedience were a law of nature. Imperial. First contact protocols activated at 420,000 kilometers, flooding the unknown vessel's approach vector with layered hails. Authority statements rendered in precise cadence, each clause citing precedent, each demand wrapped in assurances of efficiency and mercy. The Empire did not threaten. It informed. Submission was presented as the logical conclusion of disparity. One vessel without classification facing a perimeter guarded by thousands. The unknown ship did not answer at first. It continued to close, speed unchanged, vector unaltered. Distance ticked down in clean numerals. 380,000. 350,000. The command chamber's patience thinned. A senior envoy authorized escalation to mandatory compliance framing, the tone shifting. From courteous to instructional, timelines appeared. Acknowledge in 180 seconds. Disarm in 360. Prepare to be boarded in 600. The reply arrived before the countdown reached 150. The signal cut through Imperial harmonics with blunt priority, narrowband and unadorned. No insignia, no anthem. The visual resolved into a functional bridge. Dark surfaces, hard lines, stations arranged for reach rather than display. A human officer stood centered, hands clasped behind their back, posture relaxed, eyes steady. No visible rank markers, we. Acknowledge receipt, the officer said. The translation engines worked harder than they should have, then stabilized. Your assumptions are incorrect. A ripple of disbelief moved through the chamber. An admiral leaned forward, amused. The envoy reiterated the Empire's authority, emphasizing the numerical imbalance, now rendered as a rotating schematic. 10,000 Imperial vessels across the perimeter, one unidentified hull approaching without escorts. The human officer's gaze did not flick to the display. We are not petitioning, the officer said. We are not negotiating terms of inclusion. We are informing you that your authority does not apply. Does not apply. The words flagged as anomalous rhetoric. Analysts rechecked the translation. It held. The Empire pivoted to legal doctrine, citing classifications for undeclared polities and the corrective necessity of processing non-compliant populations. The human officer inclined their head slightly, a gesture that read as acknowledgement rather than concession. We crossed interstellar space under our own power more than 2 centuries ago, they said. We are not undeclared, and we do not kneel. Do not kneel. Silence followed, heavy and brief. An admiral laughed, sharp and dismissive, and authorized the countdown marker to appear in the human feed. The numerals began to fall, 300, 299. 298. At 240, the human officer spoke again. This is your final opportunity to disengage, they said. Withdraw beyond 1.2 million kilometers. Power down offensive systems. We will not pursue. And if we refuse, the envoy asked, irritation edging their voice, then you will. Learn why our ships look the way they do. The distance closed to 300,000 kilometers. The unknown vessel's profile grew, seams and layers resolving with uncomfortable clarity. Power curves remained flat, stubbornly low, no shield bloom, no evasive adjustments. At 180, Imperial doctrine required a final compliance prompt. It was transmitted automatically, stripped of nuance. The human officer waited until the last word rendered, then closed their eyes for a fraction of a second, as if concluding a routine briefing. We do not kill prisoners, they said. Plan accordingly. The channel closed. Across the tactical. Display distant human signatures, previously dismissed as background noise. Adjusted vectors by fractions of a degree. Acceleration profiles began to rise, smooth and synchronized. The Empire dismissed it as a belated attempt to flee. Orders. To fire queued without urgency. Authority had been asserted, refusal recorded. The outcome, they believed, was already decided. The first volley was meant to instruct. Imperial gunnery officers selected 3 cruisers on the forward arc and authorized a demonstration strike at 18,000 kilometers. Energy output capped at 15%. The beams lanced out in perfect coherence, spectra tuned to overload any known shielding system. The command chamber watched with practiced detachment, waiting for the familiar bloom of collapsing fields and cascading alarms. The beams struck the unknown vessel and disappeared. Not deflected, not scattered, absorbed. Light bled across layered armor plates and drained into the seams between them. vanishing as if poured into depthless reservoirs. Thermal spikes registered across the hull, then flattened within 0.9 seconds. Radiation leakage fell below background. The ship's power curve did not flare or dip. It remained a stubborn, horizontal line. No effect. Analysts blinked and reran the data. A second volley followed immediately, this time from 6 cruisers, output raised to 30%, and frequencies staggered to induce resonance failure. The unknown vessel did not maneuver. It did not raise shields. It held vector and took the fire squarely, armor blackening in controlled patterns as ablative layers sacrificed themselves exactly as designed. Efficiency calculations populated the display. 91.4% absorption, revised to 92.0 as more telemetry. Arrived. The number stabilized and refused to move. Murmurs crept through the chamber. An admiral ordered escalation. 12 ships fired at 45%. Then a battleship-class emitter joined at 60, violating peacetime margins. For 3.2 seconds, the battlespace was nothing but glare, energy bright enough to cast sharp shadows across Imperial hulls, thousands of kilometers away. When the light cleared, the vessel was still there. Armor plates had sloughed away in sheets, venting heat into vacuum, revealing identical layers beneath, intact, aligned, unhurried. Internal temperature graphs peaked and fell, in measured cycles. Life sign counts held steady, no decompression, no loss of control. The ship neither accelerated nor retreated. They are still there. The phrase slipped from a junior officer before discipline caught up. It was logged anyway, flagged as emotional variance. At 70% output, Imperial weapons began to strain. Emitter housings overheated. Containment fields wavered. One cruiser dropped out of formation to vent plasma, filing a damage report that listed target non-compliance as the cause. The irony went unremarked. The admirals ordered a brief pause to recalibrate firing solutions, irritation bleeding into their voices. During the lull, long-range sensors updated. The distance signatures previously dismissed as noise, 67 in total, adjusted vectors by measurable margins. Acceleration profiles rose smoothly, not in spikes, but in ramps. Distances began to close from 2.1 million kilometers to 1.9. The Empire tagged the movement as evasive behavior, a belated attempt to withdraw. The unknown vessel transmitted a single data burst, unencrypted and narrow-band. Impact graphs filled Imperial displays, absorption curves overlaid with firing profiles. A short line of text sat beneath them, time-stamped and unadorned. Efficiency acceptable. The chamber went quiet. One last demonstration volley was authorized, and 80% to end the anomaly and restore order. As capacitors charged, an elder strategist stared at the absorption curve, at the way it flattened regardless of input, and felt the first true discomfort of the engagement. Weapons were meant to provoke reactions, maneuver, panic, collapse. This target did none of those things. Across the void, the vessel held its course, armor still steaming faintly, as if inviting the Empire to continue making the same mistake. They did not evade the next strike. They advanced, as Imperial capacitors. Reached full charge at 80% output, the unknown vessel's drive curve changed. Not with a flare, not with a burst, but with a smooth, relentless climb. Acceleration ticked past 6G, then 8, then crossed thresholds Imperial doctrine marked as unsurvivable. Sensors recalibrated twice before accepting the value. Sustained thrust stabilized at 12G, 12G. At that acceleration, crews should have been pulped and hulls torn apart by their own mass. The vessel closed from 18,000 kilometers to 14,000 in seconds, its vector clean, its profile unwavering. Life signs remained flat and orderly. No alarms, no structural warnings. It did not jink or spiral. It simply shortened the distance as if distance were an inconvenience. Then the rest of the human fleet revealed itself. 67 signatures flared across the tactical display, each entering its own acceleration ramp. None matched another. Invectors diverged, crossed, and recombined with unsettling precision. The dispersion pattern that had been mocked minutes earlier resolved into intent. These ships were not scattered, they were positioned. Imperial formation algorithms struggled to adapt. Human vessels slid through volumes doctrine declared unsafe, passing within tens of kilometers of Imperial hulls at relative velocities that stripped sensor vanes and scorched armor without a single shot fired. Timing offsets measured in milliseconds kept them from colliding with one another, while forcing Imperial ships into corrective maneuvers that conflicted across the line. Closing fast. Distance counters fell. 12,000 kilometers, 9,800, 7,400. Fire control solutions lagged as targeting computers chased acceleration profiles that did not spike or decay. At 12G, the humans did not outrun Imperial weapons. They outran the assumptions those weapons were built on. An Imperial cruiser broke formation to regain spacing and found a human destroyer already occupying the vector it needed, sliding past its bow with centimeters to spare. Another attempted to tighten its arc and clipped an ally's shield envelope, forcing both ships to veer and creating a gap that 3 human frigates exploited immediately. The battle space lost symmetry. Elegant arcs collapsed into crowded volumes of intersecting threat envelopes. The unknown vessel cut thrust at 4,200 kilometers and pivoted broadside in a maneuver that should have sheared it apart. Inertial dampening held. Velocity bled off in a controlled burn that placed it squarely across the projected paths of 3 Imperial command cruisers at once. Their gunners fired on reflex. Beams carved through empty space where the vessel had been half a second. Earlier, an elder strategist saw it then. The humans were not collapsing the formation with fire, they were doing it with timing. Every acceleration ramp, every cutoff, every fractional degree adjustment forced the Empire to react, and reaction stacked errors faster than doctrine could correct them. Space shrank, options vanished. At 3,000 kilometers, the human fleet settled into geometry that Imperial models labeled unstable and fatal. Weapon ports irised open along the unknown vessel's spine, dark, mechanical, unapologetic. Across the display, Imperial command ships found themselves bracketed by converging vectors they could no longer escape without colliding with their own escorts. No room left. The admirals issued orders that contradicted one another within seconds. Hold formation, spread out, advance, withdraw. Compliance with any one command violated the others. The humans did not issue new signals. They did not taunt. They simply held position, acceleration steady, timing exact. The distance counters stabilized. The lines were drawn. The Empire had believed space itself would protect it. At that moment, it learned that space, like authority, only mattered to those who understood how to use it. The first impact was logged before it was felt. Human fire control solutions converged across 3 Imperial command vessels trapped inside. 3,000 kilometers, their elegant hulls struggling to reorient without colliding with escorts. The humans did not rush. They waited for certainty. Vectors aligned. Relative velocities stabilized. Probability bands narrowed to clean margins. Then, the railguns fired. There was no flash, no warning glow. Just mass released at speed. 6 tungsten penetrators left the unknown vessel's spinal rails at a measured fraction of light speed, spaced 0.14 seconds apart to defeat predictive interception. Imperial sensors registered the impacts before their crews understood the weapons had fired. The first rod punched through layered shielding and ignored it, carrying momentum straight through the forward hull of a command cruiser. The second followed the same path with trivial deviation. Internal pressure collapsed. Power grids failed in sequence. The ship split along stress lines never meant to bear such force. 1. Missiles followed, not as a wave, but as a calculation. Human destroyers launched them in packets of 7, each missile running a distinct guidance logic. Some burned hot and obvious, drawing fire. Others coasted cold, invisible until terminal phase. Imperial point defenses engaged reflexively, intercept markers flashing green as the loud decoys died. The quiet missiles arrived untouched. At 2,500 kilometers, A second command vessel attempted a rotation maneuver to shield its core, overcorrected, under conflicting orders, and exposed its ventral plane. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening. A fourth struck milliseconds later, delayed by design to exploit the sudden pressure differential. The gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the rest of the ship collapsed inward. Life signs dropped from 904 to 0 in under 5 seconds. 2. Imperial admirals shouted for withdrawal corridors, but the geometry no longer permitted them. Human ships occupied the vectors required to escape, holding position with calm precision. The third command vessel fired wildly, energy lances splashing across empty space as its gunners tried to force an opening. A human cruiser answered with missiles carrying limited-yield nuclear charges, detonated at calculated standoff distances. The blasts were shaped and directional, tuned to crush sensor arrays and fracture hull integrity without vaporizing the ship outright. The command vessel went dark. Structure remained mostly intact. Systems died in layers. Human targeting solutions dropped it from the kill list. We count before we fire. The line appeared on an Imperial auxiliary channel, flagged as a human doctrinal artifact. Analysts barely noticed. Too much else was failing. Imperial escorts attempted to screen remaining leadership ships, but the screen dissolved under kinetic pressure. Railgun fire did not saturate, it selected. Each shot removed a ship that mattered: flag bridges, coordination hubs, logistics nodes, while lesser vessels were ignored long enough to understand what was happening. At 1,900 kilometers, a cluster of Imperial cruisers attempted a ramming maneuver against a human destroyer, desperate to trade mass for disruption. The destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.3 G, slid aside, and let the cruisers collide with one another. Human sensors logged the impact as environmental hazard neutralization. No shots were fired. The battle clock crossed 26 minutes. Imperial command. Coherence fell below 45%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses and shouted corrections. Human losses remained unchanged: 0 destroyed hulls, 3 damaged, none mission killed. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. Railgun rounds expended, 38. Missiles launched, 114. Confirmed command vessels destroyed, 2. Disabled for capture, 1. The unknown vessel transmitted a status burst, unencrypted. Primary command neutralized, it read. Secondary actions, it authorized. Resistance collapsed unevenly after that. Some Imperial captains fought on, firing until their emitters overheated or their hulls failed. Others powered down and broadcast surrender codes on every frequency they could access. The human systems acknowledged each signal automatically, marking surrendered ships in green and excluding them from targeting solutions without delay. At 33 minutes, the firing slowed. Not because targets were gone, but because the math was finished. The remaining Imperial fleet floated in disordered clusters, leaderless, weapons cooling. Damage reports cascading faster than they could be read. Human ships held position, railguns silent, missiles cold. Boarding craft remained docked. Across the void, wreckage drifted where command once existed. The Empire had built its power on spectacle and certainty. It lost it to accounting. The guns fell silent by command, not necessity. At 33 minutes and 40 seconds, every human firing solution cleared at once. Rail capacitors discharged into sinks. Missile locks dropped. Across the broken geometry of the battle space, Imperial crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission propagated outward from the unknown vessel, riding military bands, civilian relays, and emergency channels until it spilled beyond the system. The image was unadorned. The same human officer from first contact, framed identically, posture unchanged. No victory marks, no threat cadence. "This engagement is paused," they said. "All escalation has ceased. Imperial commanders prepared for demands. None came." "We are broadcasting under interstellar law," the officer continued. Data panes unfolded beside them, stark and readable. Definitions appeared first, then thresholds. The practice of chattel slavery is prohibited, effective immediately. Any vessel or installation engaged in the transport, ownership, or processing of sentient beings is designated a criminal enterprise. Across Imperial hulls, internal systems flared as registry codes lit red. Cargo holds long considered routine were suddenly flagged as liabilities. Manifests auto-updated. Command officers stared at their own displays in disbelief. Second, the officer said, surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard distress and surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding will be conducted only to secure weapons and render aid. We do not kill prisoners. The line repeated. Across channels, clipped and final. Human targeting systems enforced it without exception. Green markers spread across the tactical display as more Imperial ships powered down, some cautiously, others in visible relief. Human fire control excluded them instantly, even when it cost firing efficiency against remaining hostile targets. Third, the officer said, there will be trials. The word landed heavier than any kinetic strike. Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded, jurisdiction will be asserted. Sentences will be imposed by courts, not fleets. An Imperial legal attaché attempted to interrupt, citing sovereignty and historical accords. The transmission did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement, the officer replied. Accords that permit it are void. Numbers. Scrolled beneath the image, precise and unemotional. Estimated enslaved populations identified, 4.1 million. Vessels flagged for seizure, 297. Command personnel designated for detention pending trial, 182. Humanitarian transfer window, 72 hours. Human. Ships began to move again, not toward targets, but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in controlled intervals. Medics visible through viewports. Weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones swarmed crippled Imperial hulls to stabilize atmospheres and prevent cascading failures. A human frigate adjusted. Thrust to shield a powerless cruiser from drifting debris, altering course by fractions of a degree to absorb the impact instead. The officer concluded without emphasis. You mistook restraint for weakness, they said. This is restraint. The transmission ended. In the quiet that followed, the Empire confronted a reality it had never modeled. The battle had stopped not because humanity could not continue, but because it had decided the killing was no longer justified. The law had arrived on the battlefield, and it was being enforced. The realization did not come from the battlefield. It came from the observers who had been watching without interference. Their coalition arrays tuned wide, their analysts trained to distrust first impressions. As the law broadcast propagated and human ships shifted to rescue and control, coalition intelligence cells began comparing what they had seen with archives that predated the Empire's oldest victories. The patterns aligned too cleanly to be coincidence. Human movements had not been reactive. They had been anticipatory. Acceleration profiles from the opening minutes were overlaid with dormant navigation charts, pulled from obsolete probe networks. The vectors matched corridors mapped centuries earlier, abandoned as strategically irrelevant, then quietly revalidated by human traffic logs going back more than 200 years. The disposition of 67 ships across 2.1 million kilometers was not a response to Imperial presence. It was a standing lattice. They were already in position, a coalition tactician said, voice flat. Sensor reconciliation confirmed it. Beneath civilian noise and background radiation, logistics signatures emerged like submerged structures. It low-tide. Fuel depots hollowed into cometary bodies, ammunition caches buried in dead moons, repair docks masked as survey platforms and research stations. Carbon dating on the oldest installations forced multiple recalibrations before the EA. Numbers were accepted, 214 years. Some nodes were older. This was anticipated. The phrase circulated through encrypted coalition channels, never broadcast toward Imperial space. This knowledge was not leverage, it was warning. Human doctrine files, long dismissed as theoretical, papers from a backwater polity, suddenly made operational sense. Kinetic weapons were not ideological. They were logistical. Slugs could be manufactured anywhere with mass and time. Armor could be repaired without exotic fields. Crews could be trained under sustained acceleration until 12 Dri became survivable. Routine. Human fleets were not optimized for decisive wars. They were optimized for endurance against enemies that did not negotiate. A coalition historian pulled a classified record from a century prior. A peripheral system that had gone dark after reporting unknown hostile contact. The Empire had written it off as internal collapse. The sensor residue, when re-examined, showed absorption curves and vector geometries that now looked uncomfortably familiar. "They've been enforcing this quietly," someone said, "for decades." The implication settled hard. Humanity had not been hiding. It had been curating outcomes, allowing expansion until a line was crossed, waiting until evidence was undeniable, until the moral ledger could be displayed in numbers instead of rhetoric. The law broadcast had not been improvised under fire. It was a template, refined and ready. Coalition simulations branched rapidly and collapsed just as fast. In every credible escalation path, human fleets did not shatter. They adjusted. Pre-positioned, forces closed predictable choke points. Logistics outran attrition. Even defeat scenarios ended not in annihilation, but in controlled retreat and renewed enforcement elsewhere. In the drifting Imperial wreckage, survivors struggled to understand how authority had failed so completely. In coalition space, the question was colder. If humanity had prepared for centuries, then this engagement was not the start of a war. It was the moment the galaxy noticed a policy that had already been in effect. Neutralization resumed without ceremony. Human command reclassified the remaining. Imperial hulls in seconds, hostile, surrendered, undecided. The distinction carried immediate consequences. Green markers were excluded from every firing solution. Red markers were not warned again. Missile hatches opened across the human lattice. This time there was no restraint for demonstration. Launches came in disciplined waves, hundreds of signatures blooming and vanishing as guidance systems shifted between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single axis. They flowed, divided, rejoined, occupying volumes of space. Imperial doctrine had never modeled as lethal simultaneously. Point defenses engaged on instinct and failed by design. Interceptors chased the loud decoys, hot drives, exaggerated signatures, while real warheads slid through blind arcs created by panicked maneuvering and overlapping shields. At 200 kilometers, the first Imperial cruiser died with engines. Firing, hull fractured by kinetic impact and internal overpressure. At 5800, another lost power and rolled helplessly, broadcasting surrender codes seconds too late to cancel inbound fire already committed by logic gates that did not bargain. The cascade began. Imperial captains watched their tactical displays bleed red and made decisions in isolation. Command authority no longer existed as a coherent force. Some powered down immediately, transmitting surrender across every channel they could access. Human systems acknowledged them within milliseconds, flipping their markers from red to green, as missiles peeled away mid-course, retargeting without hesitation. Others hesitated, hoping to survive unnoticed. They did not. Surrender cascade. The phenomenon propagated faster than any broadcast. Crews observed neighboring ships survive surrender exactly as promised and acted accordingly. At 19 minutes into the second phase, surrendered vessels outnumbered hostile ones 2-1. At 31 minutes, 4-1. Boarding operations followed, behind the missile waves, not as spectacle, but as process. Human cutters approached disabled hulls at controlled relative velocities, grappling points locking with mechanical certainty. Breach teams moved in pairs, weapons slung low, medics between them. Resistance was sporadic and brief. When it appeared, human teams did not escalate. They sealed bulkheads, vented compartments, and waited. Gravity and air did the rest. Do not fire on green. The directive pulsed constantly across human channels, It was obeyed even when surrendered ships drifted into optimal firing lines against still hostile targets. Gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve separation. The choice slowed the neutralization by minutes. No objections were logged. At 42 minutes, an Imperial carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strike craft in a desperate attempt to overwhelm point defenses through saturation. Human response was immediate and impersonal. Defensive grids activated not to annihilate, but to shape space. Electromagnetic pulses fired in patterned bursts, frying guidance systems without rupturing. Cockpits, hundreds of fighters tumbled powerless, pilots alive, instruments dead. Automated recovery beacons activated from the wreckage, and human traffic control began assigning lanes before the last craft stopped spinning. Another cluster of heavy cruisers tried to form a defensive ring around a crippled logistics tender, their movements tight and emotional rather than calculated. Human analysis flagged the maneuver in under a second. Missile fire softened the ring just enough. Railguns punched precise holes through power cores, avoiding secondary explosions. The tender went dark without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants from its holds. Throughout the phase, the unknown vessel held central position, its mass anchoring the geometry. Railguns fired sparingly now, each shot deliberate, removing ships that threatened to destabilize surrender zones or endanger boarded hulls. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. Missiles expended 296, railgun rounds 17 additional, nuclear charges 0 in this phase. Human losses remained unchanged. Imperial resistance collapsed unevenly. Some captains fired until emitters overheated or hulls failed under cumulative stress. Others cut power in silence, their surrender codes arriving without words. Human systems treated them identically. Green markers spread until red became rare. At 68 minutes, the final organized hostile formation broke apart, its remaining ships powering down within a span of 30 seconds. The battle space did not erupt in celebration. It simply went quiet. Hundreds of Imperial hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, damage reports queued, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them with methodical care. Repair drones stabilized, compromised atmospheres. Traffic corridors were established to prevent collision, boarding tallies finalized, prisoners secured 3.9 million. Injured, treated, 428,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last hostile marker disappeared. An Imperial officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human frigate alter course by fractions of a degree to shield their powerless hull from drifting. Debris and felt something settle where certainty used to be. Not relief, not fear, recognition. The Empire's fleet had not been destroyed. It had been dismantled, decision by decision, vector by vector, until fighting no longer made sense. Human command logged fleet neutralization complete and transitioned fully to humanitarian and legal operations. The violence ended not with exhaustion or annihilation, but with the quiet certainty that there was nothing left to argue about. Mercy followed the last shutdown like a scheduled operation. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue that ignored rank and favored need. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured Imperial crew were triaged without comment, species tags flashing briefly before dissolving into the same priority schema. Painkillers flowed, splints locked, bleeding stopped. The work was fast, practiced, and conspicuously indifferent. No uniforms, no reprisals. The directive propagated with the same authority as a firing order. Human Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and transferred without spectacle. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, fed into a legal system already running at scale. Detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Food met dietary requirements calculated down to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in neutral cadence. Prisoner counts stabilized at 3.9 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like promises. Across the system, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys arrived on vectors cleared hours earlier, bearing markings from worlds that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the shift. Neighboring systems were not waiting for invitations. They were defecting. Declarations arrived in batches. Suspension of imperial tribute, opening of ports to human oversight. Requests for arbitration under the statutes broadcast during the battle. Political gravity shifted not with speeches, but with filings and signatures. "We accept these terms," the phrase repeated across multiple channels, identical wording traced back to the law broadcast template. Analysts flagged mimetic adoption. Human command did not respond. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding action completed. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity: enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked to sensor logs and sworn testimony collected in real time. Command personnel flagged earlier, 182 individuals, were separated and transferred under guard that neither tightened when they struggled nor softened when they pleaded. The guards had heard both before. An imperial governor attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for immediate political realignment. The reply came from a legal officer, not a commander. "Alignment does not erase crimes," they said. The ED channel closed. Inside the habitats, rumors moved faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed surrender worked exactly as promised. They noticed no one was spaced, no compartments flooded, no reprisals taken for insults shouted in panic. The lesson settled unevenly, then held. At 96 hours, the first liberated populations transferred off seized vessels. Families stepped into gravity they had not chosen, blinking under lights calibrated for comfort rather than efficiency. Human medics stood aside as civilian agencies took over, their role complete. The unknown vessel remained on station, scarred armor patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a final operational note. Force applied. Compliance achieved, mercy sustained. In distant systems, leaders weighed the cost of defiance against the evidence streaming through every relay. The choice was no longer abstract. Humanity had not conquered territory. It had offered an order, and shown, with meticulous restraint, what followed when that order was accepted. The quiet settled faster than expected. Wreckage fields stabilized into predictable orbits. Traffic lanes reopened under human advisories. Trial schedules propagated with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the system looked orderly again, as if violence had been a temporary distortion rather than a defining act. Human sensors did not relax. Deep-range arrays continued to sweep beyond the rim. Baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. At 118 hours post-engagement, one array returned a signal that failed classification on every pass. It was faint, persistent, and wrong. Not a fleet, not a probe. A pressure in space-time that suggested movement without conventional drives. Analysts erased the data. The anomaly remained. The source lay beyond mapped space, tens of thousands of astronomical units out, approaching on a vector that ignored jump corridors entirely. Mass estimates fluctuated wildly, as if the object resisted measurement. Emission fragments matched partial records pulled from sealed archives, studies of civilizations that had vanished so completely their names survived only as warnings. Exterminator signature. Human command convened without alarms. No broadcasts. Interrupted relief operations. The information was routed through channels that had existed long before contact with the Empire. Contingency headers unlocked. Timelines populated. The numbers were not comforting, but they were familiar. A coalition observer, cleared under emergency protocol, asked a single question across a secure link. "Is this connected to the battle?" The reply came after a brief pause. "No," the human officer said. "It is concurrent, meaning it would have come regardless. Meaning the Empire had never been the final problem. The unknown vessel adjusted station by a fraction of a degree, aligning long-range sensors with the incoming anomaly. Around it, human ships mirrored the movement without instruction, geometry, settling into a configuration older than Imperial charts. Ammunition tallies updated, training rotations shifted. Messages went out to systems that had not yet chosen a side, carrying no threats, only data. Beyond the edge, something ancient continued its approach, indifferent to law, mercy, or surrender. Humanity watched it with the same calm it had shown an empire, and began doing the math again.